dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste and a very warm welcome to all. On behalf of the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, I welcome you all at the World Sustainable Development Summit 2022. This summit is the only independently convened event of this scale in the developing world that brings together world leaders on a single platform. This ministerial session is on leadership in developed countries, reconciling the role of states and markets for sustainable consumption and production. We have two very seasoned diplomats moderating this session. Ambassador Arne Walther, who is also on the International Steering Committee of WSDS, and Ambassador Manjeev Puri, Distinguished Fellow, the Energy and Resources Institute. We are privileged and delighted to have a distinguished line of 7 speakers who will deliver the ministerial address. We are pleased to note that 4 out of 7 speakers in this ministerial session are women. These dignitaries need no introduction. His Excellency, Mr. John Forbes Kerry, United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, His Excellency, Mr. Espen Barth Eide, Honorable Minister, Minister of Climate and Environment, Norway, Her Excellency, Ms. Steffi Lemke, Honorable Minister, Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, Germany, His Excellency, Mr. Stephen Gilbert, Honorable Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Canada, Her Excellency, Honorable Ms. Emma Kerry, Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Finland, Her Excellency, Ms. Barbara Pompili, Honorable Minister of Ecological Transition, France, Her Excellency, Ms. Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, Honorable Minister, Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, Spain. I now invite Ambassador Walther and Ambassador Puri to conduct the proceedings of the session. Over to you, Ambassador Puri, first. Thank you.
Sherry, thank you very much. And Your Excellencies, on behalf of both Ambassador Arne Walther and myself, let me please welcome you to this session of the World Sustainable Development Summit in Delhi. Your Excellencies, we have just had the inauguration of the WSDS by the Minister of Environment of India and the Honorable Prime Minister of India. We have honored and been honored to have Mr. Michael Bloomberg receive the Sustainable Lifetime Sustainable Development Award, which TERI gives every year. So this has begun very well in a very auspicious manner, although we are still, let me say, hampered by the COVID restrictions. But of course, that gives us this wonderful opportunity of having you all from across the globe tuning in and being with us. Let me tell you, Excellencies, we have roughly about 120 countries registered in the number of participants from across the world. We have thousands of people registered to hear into this summit. And I have little doubt in my mind that this shall be perhaps one of the more defining sessions. Your Excellencies, time is short, and I will hand over to Ambassador Arne Walther. But I want to just remind you of one thing about this session. This is a session from where we want to take inspiration. Normally speaking, the big talk in sustainable development as well as climate change is leadership of the developed world. And in that, most of the effort on part of people like me is to see what can be done in terms of cooperation. That's certainly very important. But I personally believe that much more important is what can be done in terms of the role model, the best practices that we can get. Your Excellencies, the title of this session is Leadership in Developed Countries, not, if I may say so, by developed countries. That we almost take for granted, and we are sure that you will be there in support of the developing world and in the service of humankind. Your Excellencies, I won't take up more of your time. I want to say a very big thank you once again on behalf of TERI. Secretary John Kerry is, of course, an old friend of TERI. This is not the first time he's going to be there at the WSDS. But all the rest of you, if you haven't been here before, sirs, ladies, we would like to see you here again. This, let me reiterate what Shelley had said, is perhaps the biggest and most important sustainable development event held in the developing world. And it has been held for nearly 20 years. It is therefore a platform which reaches out in an extremely big manner, and we are very proud to be hosting it here. Ambassador Arne Walther. All of you perhaps know him in his role as Secretary General of the International Energy Agency. He has been Norway's ambassador to Japan, but from my perspective, more importantly, to India. I am therefore privileged and very honored to hand over the microphone to him. The screen is yours, Ambassador Walther.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. Since we are all with you in TERI in India, what better way to kick off this ministerial session on sustainable production and consumption and the leadership challenges involved by recalling the words of Mahatma Gandhi, who said that the earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed. Add to that our current concerns about the climate, environmental degradation, and economic disparities, not only among nations, but within nations. These concerns will not go away tomorrow. Our session theme is indeed a crucial one for a just and orderly transition to a sustainable common future. We have the privilege to hear from the climate and environment supremos of 7 industrialized countries, all committed to the SDGs, all forceful voices in addressing climate change. They have much to say, but our time is short, and we look forward to their cherry picking among their many efforts, the challenges they face, and the results they have achieved. But let me start with the C word, COVID, with its ongoing human toll and societal lockdown. It has disrupted our lifestyle, but it also offers an opportunity to build back better in terms of reversing our current unsustainable patterns of production and consumption. Disrupted global economic relations with high commodity prices, energy prices, would seem to make that path more difficult. And current geopolitical tension, now at the boiling point over the Ukraine, does not make things any easier. In our affluent and vibrant democracies, elections are always around the corner. Political promise of lifestyle sacrifices today for a more sustainable tomorrow is not an easy vote getter. Some politicians would admit that they know exactly what to do, but if they do it in full measure, they would not get re-elected. An angry electorate would vote for someone else. Governments would face equal anger, especially from the youth, should they not show leadership and not do much more of what has to be done for sustainable and equitable development. That anger, too, can jeopardize their re-election. So may I also ask you to add a comment on the extent to which, if at all, short-term lifestyle threats and worries in your affluent societies limit government ability to take more of the urgent action that is needed to meet SDGs, both domestically and globally in boosted multilateral endeavor? And if so, what to do about it? With these words, it's a great honor for me to give the floor to John Kerry, US Special Envoy for Climate, the former Secretary of State for President Obama. He almost became president in 2004 and is, of course, no stranger to the world, not least no stranger to TERI. The US is back in global efforts to do something about climate change and promote SDGs. Secretary Kerry is the face and the voice of that return. Sir, the screen is yours.
Well, Arne, thank you very much. Mr. Ambassadors, Manjeev, my friend, thank you both for your leadership, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this conversation with a great group of colleagues who are all working closely together in this endeavor. And you've well put the challenge. I want to thank TERI for continuing to organize this summit around one of the most critical issues of our day, perhaps the most critical, despite the noise coming from Ukraine and the potential of Ukraine to be incredibly disruptive to every effort we are all making on a global basis. But still, fundamentally, the climate crisis remains the single greatest security challenge we all face. And without any question, you can't talk about sustainability if you don't deal with the climate crisis. There will just obviously not be anything sustainable if we don't do our homework here and get the job done. So last year, when I joined this event, I said at the time that India is a red hot investment destination for the clean energy transition. And why do I say that about clean energy transition? Because obviously, clean energy policy writ large, is central to our ability to be able to be sustainable, central to our ability to be able to pull back from the abyss with respect to the climate crisis. And India's clean energy transition is absolutely critical to that endeavor. So it goes without saying, but we'll say it anyway, and I'm sure everybody will emphasize this. There are only maybe a handful of less developed countries that are even trying sincerely and with consequence to become sustainable. The truth is that almost no country on the planet is living sustainably today. And given the population growth we're going to witness, the level of current resource utilization is rapacious and not at all geared towards the prospect of sustainability. We all understand that. That doesn't mean we can't get there, but it's going to take a monumental transformation, let alone to manage the climate crisis, which is the precedent, the condition precedent, to be able to deal with the concept of being sustainable. So Prime Minister Modi, to his credit, has set an ambitious goal for India. 500 gigawatts of renewables must be deployed over the course of the next 8 years to 10 years. And the criticality of achieving that goal is very simple. It's the only way that India itself becomes compliant with the 1.5 degree goal that we all ratified and embraced again in Glasgow recently. So let me just zoom out for a moment and give you a macro sense of where I think we are with respect to the condition precedent to be able to engage in sincere and genuine efforts for sustainability, and that is, are we going to tackle the climate crisis? Are we going to be serious about this? Are we going to be real? And to some degree, I believe we are trapped in a business as usual mode right now. We have to be honest about where we find ourselves in this climate fight. We're seeing devastating consequences around the planet. And the scientists are telling us that we may well also be seeing already tipping points with respect to critical elements of this battle. The Arctic, the Antarctic, the coral reefs, pollution writ large, and that is what greenhouse gases are. It's pollution. And pollution is killing 10 million people a year just due to the impact on health and breathing and lungs. And it kills another 5 million people a year just to the extreme heat. That's today, before we go beyond the 1.2 degrees that we're at as a planet now. So in 2022, we have said this has to be the decisive decade, and it does. Not because John Kerry or Espen Eide or Barbara Pompili or Stephen Guillot, not because we say it, but because people whose lifetime is spent measuring where we really are in empirical evidence, people who analyze science, scientists who tell us why things are happening in the way they are, that evidence is now insurmountable, that is not even in doubt that we are seeing these profound changes on the planet Earth, which threaten life itself. And the level of resource depletion, the level of biodiversity destruction, together with the real threats that we're seeing to life on a daily basis through floods, fires, mudslides, drought, heat, and intensity of storms, all of which is going to grow even more. Now, that's sort of the challenge. The upside, and there is an upside here, is that in Glasgow, we got 65% of global GDP to commit to plans that are legitimately judged to be able to get us to 1.5 degrees, to hold on to that, to keep it alive. That is the way we framed it. And you have Canada that's here, you have Europe that's here, the United States, Japan, South Korea, the EU writ large, and UK and South Africa has a plan to get there. Indonesia a plan to get there, but not yet part of the 65% of GDP that is on track to get there. The problem is we have 35% that's not getting there. And that 35% that's not getting there is made up mostly of still developing countries, but also of some very powerful economies. 20 economies in the world, 20 countries in the world equal 80% of all the emissions on the planet. And unfortunately, some of those countries are not yet adopting plans that do what the science tells us we need to do, which is to reach hold the 1.5 degrees and cut our emissions by 45% over the course of this next 8-year period. So we hope that the pledges made in Glasgow will be fulfilled. That's the task we have in front of us right now. Fulfillment of the promises made in Glasgow and achievement of greater promise from some of those countries that have large economies but are not yet in a position to be able to keep 1.5 degrees alive. Now, China joined with the United States in Glasgow to say that this year they are going to submit an ambitious national action plan to deal with methane, which is, as we know, 20 to 80 times more damaging than CO2. And so that's a big beginning. And they also committed, China, to try to accelerate their transition out of coal. Also very, very critical. And what we need to be doing on a global basis now is taking the trillions of dollars that many of the richest countries in the world and richest corporations in the world have committed to this transition, and we have to make sure we deploy it. The UN report on finance tells us that in order to do what we need to do to maintain even the breath of light for sustainability, we must cut those emissions by the 45% over the course of the next few years. If we don't do that, 1.5 degrees is gone. And if we don't do that, you can't even reach net zero by 2050. So, Mr. Ambassadors and my colleagues, we need to make sure that we are deploying literally about $4 trillion a year for the next 30 years in order to bring online the technologies that will empower us to have the battery storage, to have the electrolyzers that create green hydrogen fuel, to be able to actually deal with carbon capture and storage and utilization. We need much greater research by our nations. We need to pull together. The good thing is we have the greatest assembly of private sector partners now that we've ever had. We do have trillions of dollars that have said we're prepared to invest, but we have to create the climate and capacity for that investment to actually take place. We have a new entity which we created in Glasgow called the First Movers Coalition. Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, largest container company, has agreed that the next 8 ships they build will be carbon free. Volvo has made a commitment that 10% of the steel they buy now, even though it's not economical for them, they're going to buy green steel. And that means that people who produce the green steel see that there's a market there that can move them forward. And in Davos, we're going to launch carbon removal and aluminum commitments, and we're going to have cement and chemical commitments for transition within industry. Lafarge-Holcim, one of the largest cement dealers in the world, is now already making green cement. So there is, in the private sector and enterprise engagement here, I think, the possibility that we can really accelerate, we can jumpstart. And for all the developing countries in Africa, and South Asia, Central Asia, other places, they can look to a world in which there will be green products, green capacity to translate this, to create this transition. And as a result, they don't have to develop by making the mistakes that the already developed world made. We have an obligation as a developed world to help provide the wherewithal, the finance, and the technology to help them avoid that. And I think if we come together adequately in the next 8 years, we have the opportunity to win this battle. And that will set the stage for the longer term transition to the sustainable actions that have to be part of this effort, even now. But to get to that full measure of circular economy and of sustainability, we have to win this battle right away with respect to climate. I'll end there.
Secretary Kerry, Special Presidential Envoy Secretary Kerry, thank you very much, sir. The battle we must win. We must win it not only for us, but for the succeeding generations and for our planet. You are so right, sir. And I think you said it very well, that we need to act hugely, and we need to act now. And I'm very grateful to you for having acknowledged India and our Prime Minister's role in leading up front, despite the fact that we have a huge lot of development imperatives to do. Secretary Kerry, I would leave for you just two thoughts. I was very happy to see what you said and promised in terms of global action. For me personally, the most important things were what you want to do in the United States. You perhaps do not realize or may not understand the huge role model impact that that would have. The best practices that what you would do in terms of, let me say, electrification of public transport, or the use of green energy, or the fact that coal would be wound down, each and every one of those things, they matter. And then for all of us, they are comfort zones to turn to. My last point to you, Your Excellency, just for your consideration. At Glasgow, the Prime Minister of India, other than his huge commitments in renewable energy, also spoke about life, which is essentially lifestyles and environment. And we count on you again as leaders, the Europeans, the Americans, the Canadians, and of course, all of us, in terms of lifestyles. And if we can move away from profligate consumption, I'm sure there's lots of action in the area of production in any case. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for always being there for TERI. We very much look forward to all that you do for us, both upfront and otherwise, as friends, as partners, and as our great supporter. We are extremely grateful to you that in the midst of your hectic traveling schedule, you found the time for this summit and to participate here. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great privilege to turn to a country with which TERI has particularly fantastic relationships. Your Excellency, Minister Espen Barth Eide, let me tell you, sir, that your embassy has been inexplicably linked with TERI. And of course, Ambassador Walther's presence, I'm sure, underlines that and underscores that in a big manner. But that has continued not only from his time. And we are therefore particularly privileged. Indeed, we wouldn't have let this session take place without your presence there and so many of your august colleagues. Having said this, let me also say something else. We in India count on Norway and your leadership. We count on you in several areas. But let me tell you some of the areas which are new and where you are taking leadership, which is important. The oceans, blue economy. You've been particularly good at that. And these are things which are, in our opinion, for India, which is if I use the European expression, a continental-sized subcontinent jutting out into two of the major seas of the world. These are of critical importance to us. We look forward, sir, therefore, not only to what you have to say, but in terms of actual leadership, which we can then use in terms of us and our desire for development, and to do what Secretary Kerry said, don't repeat the mistakes and yet press the accelerator of development. Your Excellency, Espen Barth Eide, sir, the screen is yours.
Namaste, ladies and gentlemen, friends, and thank you very much to Manjeev, Puri and TERI for that wonderful introduction, but also for including me in this panel. I very much cherish the work of your institute, which I have followed for many, many years, as you know, but also the leadership of India and your Prime Minister in this important work. So it's great that we are together. And having listened to John, I just want to start by saying that if I ever get pessimistic and worried in this job, I will just listen to John again. And then I'm reminded that there is energy here to take us forward, to change the world into a better place. And I think it can be done. And what makes me optimistic, dear friends, is that more and more people gets it. I mean, the youth have gotten it a long time ago. The researchers got it. Your institute got it. Some of us worried. But now we really see movement in the private sector. We see green capital. We see corporations, companies all over the world looking at the transition to a sustainable, renewable, and circular economy, not as a problem, but as an opportunity. That's something that you can, an economy in which you can flourish and win and compete constructively as a race to the top. Just as John was just saying that, you know, when people start asking for the carbon footprint of steel, it becomes economically viable to come up with a steel with the lowest possible and preferably no carbon footprint, and then you win that market. So it's very much, I think the role of governments now is not any longer to tell business that there is a green shift coming. They know. It's more about creating the infrastructure, setting the framework, the tax system, the fees, bring resources together, use incentives, use rules and regulations, prohibitions, recommendations, everything we can do as government on top of spending money, which of course we also sometimes have to do in order to accelerate change that is already happening, because it is moving now. The world is moving. And I very much believe that it's possible. The other essential role of governments is to make sure we have people on board. And in global governance, that we have every country on board, because it's extremely unfair to create a green economy, which is good for the world and for nature and climate, but which leaves a lot of people behind. But it's also very unfair to leave people behind when sort of the rich and developing world is moving to a post-carbon economy, and then large parts of the world is stuck with an economy which is not any longer in demand. So to look at this, you know, both the cost sharing, but also the opportunity sharing, I think is incredibly important. And then I want to say, I don't know if John is still with us, but I know that not many years ago, he visited Ny-Ålesund in Spitsbergen, and that's the extreme north of Norway, islands way north of Norway. There's the last stop before the North Pole. There we have one of several research stations. India, by the way, has its own research installation there for Arctic research. And I go there once in a while with a few years in between. And then you can go on literally on top of a mountain, literally. And then you look at the daily measurement of ppm, parts per million. And when I was there, it was 424. This is the Northern Hemisphere, extreme winter, particularly high. But I remember I was there and I saw 385, and I thought that was shocking. But this is sort of the physical proof, one of the physical proofs that the world is changing. We change it. We have to act, and we have to act now. And that's why we need leadership and cooperation, and we need cooperation between governments and private sector and civil society and academia. I will not use much time because there are many people to speak, but I have to say that since you talked about Norwegian leadership. I happen to be the president of UNEA, the United Nations Environment Assembly. And I would use this opportunity to ask all of you to come to Nairobi in 12 days. You can either come there physically if you have a role there, or you can follow virtually. So you can come like we all are together in India today. In 12 days, we can be together in Africa under firm Norwegian leadership, where we will start up the work towards what I hope will be a global treaty on reducing plastic litter. Not get rid of plastics, but make sure that plastic move into a circular chain and that we stop throwing it into nature and into the ocean. And I also would like to work towards creating a chemicals panel, because on top of biodiversity and on climate, we also need to work on pollution, and particularly the pollution that we have created. So that's part of our leadership right now, and I very much count on everybody to help us there. And this is a year, and this is my very last point, believe me now. My very last point here is that this is really a year when nature and climate is coming together in this great work. The climate COP that many of us just went to in Glasgow was also a nature's COP, because it really emphasized that net zero is not only about reducing emissions, which we have to do, but it also is about maintaining and increasing nature's capacity to give us the nature services that we need to survive. That's carbon sink, biodiversity, and so on. So I think to connect the Kunming work with the UNEA work that we're doing in Nairobi, with what happened in Glasgow and will happen in Sharm el Sheikh, is also very much about seeing that this is a package in which climate, pollution, and nature preservation has to come together. We can get this right. And I really, really believe that as long as we have people with us, regions with us, a global united effort, we have a great opportunity to create a world which is very different, but much better than the one that we will get if we don't get it right. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Eide. Listening to you and looking at what you have done, and also thinking about what you will do in the future, I can assure you that as a Norwegian citizen, I will vote for you in the next election as well. We now go from Norway to Germany. Minister Steffi Lemke, is Minister for Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Production. She's one of three co-founders of the Greens, now in a traffic light coalition government. She represents a European industrial powerhouse, which is in an Energiewende, a great transition. And we look very much forward to hearing more about your challenges. I leave the screen to you, Minister.
Thank you, Ambassador Walther. Thank you, Ambassador Puri. Thank you, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Kerry, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to add to the speakers before. The issue of sustainable production and sustainable consumption is, for me personally, and also for the German government, a priority. Therefore, it is positive that the Environment Ministry in Germany has also become the Ministry for Consumer Protection. I'm looking for our dialogue today, and I would also like to thank TERI for the organization of this event and for your year-long commitment in this regard. We have around 8 years left in order to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Sustainable consumption is one of many components here. It is clear that the measures have to become more ambitious. For me, it is important that at the future summit of the UN in 2023 in New York, we can display concrete progress. Financial issues are key. That is why Germany will make sustainable finance a key issue under this year's G7 presidency. We need to make sure how to finance the transition of our economies and our society towards climate neutrality. We have to make sure that the investments will be transparent in order to make sure that public and private investors can invest their money as effectively in environmental protection and climate action as possible. We also need to make better use of the potential of a green and better recovery. Many countries have launched programs for tackling the effects of the pandemic. In order to make sure that these investments will not maintain the status quo, but will be geared towards a climate neutral and research-friendly economy. Germany is supporting partner countries to achieve an economic recovery through investments in climate action and biodiversity. It is clear that individual acts and national measures cannot do justice to this necessary and wide transformation. We need a whole toolbox of legal, political, and economic instruments. Without the economy, without committed companies, this will not be possible. Many companies are tackling the challenge and have already started with the transition. However, consumers as well should benefit from the improvements in their daily lives. As new Consumer Protection Minister, I want to strengthen their rights. At the interface of environmental protection and consumer protection, I want to introduce the right to repair, to make sure that the throwaway society will not use as many resources as in the last decades. One symbol of this throwaway society are the mountains of plastic waste that are being created year after year. That is why I support my colleague from Norway to have the global agreement on the reduction of plastic waste, to have less and less plastic in the oceans and in the environment in general. Germany, the German government, will advocate this in Nairobi at UNEA to have a strong and solid agreement. Prime Minister Modi also wants to end the throwaway culture and wants to create a more sustainable lifestyle. Should consumption and production be sustainable, this would save resources and emissions, and this would help us in reaching our sustainability development goals of the 2030 agenda and the conservation of species and the fight of global heating. The best solutions are those that counteract the environmental crises and also alleviate the problems of the daily lives of our citizens. We have to start now. We have to take our planetary boundaries more seriously. That is why I, as the Federal Minister for the Environment, I plan to also make sure that nature-based solutions will be a major priority over the next years, to make sure that the measures being taken for climate action will also be working for nature conservation. The decline and death of species is the second large crisis here. And if we want to maintain the basis of life for our next generations, we have to solve those two crises hand in hand. This is a major challenge, but I'm quite confident that we can master these challenges working side by side. Thank you very much.
Madame Bundesminister, ich danke Ihnen vielmals für Ihre Rede und vielmals auch dankbar, dass Sie mir eine Gelegenheit gegeben haben, meine Deutsch noch einmal zu üben. Madam Minister, I have had the privilege of serving India in your country on 2 occasions. And as I mentioned to you, I was absolutely delighted to see a member of the Greens party in our roundtable here. You are the originals. Today, all of us use the word green. But you know, when I started my diplomatic career in an Indian embassy right across the Bundestag, you were the first parliamentarians worldwide elected on the promise of the environment. You are so super special to us. Let me also make a point to both you and to Minister Eide that today we were at the Indian Ministry of Environment, and our minister repeatedly mentioned to us, reiterating the Honorable Prime Minister's decision that we will be strong on the entire subject of plastics in India. I think you should take this message, and let me assure you that India would be a very strong supporter. Thank you very, very much for this, Madam, and wish you all part your elbows. Your Excellency, Mr. Stephen Guilbeault, we are very delighted to welcome you here. Secretary Kerry said that he's in Paris, so I am in that sense happier that, you know, the time difference is not such that he's had to start very, very early in the morning. But to you, an extremely grateful TERI says thank you very much for finding the time in the midst of so many other preoccupations to be with us. TERI Minister has an old association with Canada. We used to have an office there. The last 2 years have been a little difficult, but we hope to get back into our positive and strongly engaging relationship with your country. You are otherwise, I think, extremely important for the planet. In various ways, if one only looks at the broadest of statistics, people and the area and landmass, and the importance of your landmass where you are located geographically, I think you are particularly important, and therefore what you do in your country is in no doubt in my mind something which will have tremendous global impacts. Your help, support and cooperation for the developing world is of course fantastic, and we continue to count on it. Your Excellency, Minister Guilbeault, I am very privileged to give you the screen.
Very much, Ambassador Puri. Ministers, fellow summit attendees, it is a pleasure and a privilege to speak to you today on behalf of the Government of Canada. The timing of this summit could not be more appropriate. The world, as John said and they said, the world can no longer ignore the cost of the natural environment brought about by an unsustainable consumption and production we've seen in recent decades. Unsustainable consumption and production are on a collision course with environmental survival. We all know the signs: outrageous food waste, carbon-intensive industries, destruction of natural habitats. We also know we have an opportunity now to put a stop to this trend. As we gradually make progress in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, we can build greener and more sustainable patterns of production and consumption, embracing the principles of a circular economy. No one country has all the answers, of course. Given how interconnected the world has become, we need solutions that involve as many nations as possible. Nor is the goal of sustainable development a matter of one single policy. It requires a broad range of measures. In the few minutes that I have today, I want to tell you about Canada's experience. Last September, Canada became the first North American country to host the World Circular Economy Forum, which we co-organized with the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. The international event, with more than 9,000 registered delegates from over 160 countries, brought together business leaders, policy experts, civil society and youth to help accelerate the global transition to a circular economy. The forum focused on the actions needed in the next 5 years to raise circular ambition globally, to bring in new allies and introduce new voices into the conversation. Those actions included implementing circular procurement, taxation, investment, and trade policies. They were meant to support innovation in circularity at all levels, from SMEs to international partnerships. They also included the provision of capital, safe jobs, training, and leadership opportunities for youth, rural, and remote communities. In fact, actions aim at integrating circular, low-carbon, and nature-based solutions into the workings of the world involve policymakers, business people, and many others across society. Only with everyone's help can we tackle the planetary crisis of pollution and waste, climate, and biodiversity. On the policy front, Canada has made several concrete commitments to bolster sustainable consumption and production in our economy. The Government of Canada is taking real action to reduce plastic waste and pollution at home. After thorough research and consultation with industry partners, stakeholders, and experts, we will be instituting a ban on harmful single-use plastics this year. This will, however, be only one element of our comprehensive approach to reduce plastic pollution and move toward our goal of zero plastic waste by 2030. Currently, we are proposing to establish a recycled content requirements in plastic products and packaging. These will send the necessary market signals to drive investment in recycling infrastructure and spur innovation and technology and product design. The goal? Very simple, to extend the life of plastic materials and keep them in the economy and out of the environment. As a federation, we're also working closely with our provinces and territories to advance a Canada-wide strategy on zero plastic waste to rethink how we make, use, and manage plastics. The government has pursued creative approaches to support Canadian SMEs as they address plastic pollution. We also support research to better understand the impacts of this scourge on our environment. Internationally, Canada spearheaded the Ocean Plastic Charter in 2018, initiating the first and only global framework that identifies actions and targets across the plastics value chain and move towards a more resource-efficient and circular approach to plastic management. Building upon the Charter, Canada supports the establishment of a legally binding global agreement on plastics, one that is ambitious and effective, and that takes into account the full life cycle in addressing plastic pollution. As others have mentioned, the upcoming 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly is a crucial juncture where we will have the opportunity to launch negotiations toward a global agreement on plastics. Canada is pleased to be leading the process at UNIA 52 alongside its co-facilitator from Ghana. Together, we're working to rally UNIA participants in order to start negotiations. Canada is keen to continue cooperation with partners such as India, both bilaterally and in a multilateral fora, to promote the environment and sustainable development. In the field of sustainable finance, while citizen and consumer movements are important, we continue to believe that governments need to play a key role in terms of regulation and send in market signals, which is why we committed 20% of our climate finance to fair transition in developing countries. Recognizing the importance of factoring nature and biodiversity into financial decision-making, Canada is pleased to see the official launch of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canada would join the task force at the One Planet Summit a year ago. Given that more than half the world's economic output is linked to nature, the recommendations of the TNFD will help financial institutions and companies incorporate nature-related risks and opportunities into their strategic planning, risk management, and asset allocation decisions. Sustainable finance is crucial to all countries, including Canada, as they strive to meet their climate and environmental goals. Our country first announced its support for the voluntary international disclosure standards proposed by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure in 2019. The same kind of environmental economic approach that we in Canada take towards sustainable development, we use in our domestic climate policies. There too, we try to send strong market signals. Consider our escalating carbon price since 2019, which fosters market-based incentives to adopt more sustainable forms of consumption and production. Our country now has one of the most stringent carbon pricing systems in the world, and carbon pricing is a central policy to allow our country to meet its climate targets, including commitments to net zero by 2050. At the recent COP26 meeting in Glasgow, our Prime Minister challenged the world to expand the use of carbon pricing globally. Governments and the private sector must work together to achieve the objectives of more sustainable consumption and production. Successful transition in our economies can lead us all to achieve the sustainable development that must be part of the 21st century world. Gatherings such as this summit can propel us towards those ambitions. My thanks to the Energy and Resource Institute for its positive and proactive role in driving forward climate action in India and internationally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Your words carry additional weight and spice against the background of your earlier activity as an activist. You were even arrested and put in jail for mischief, climbing a tower, a 300-meter tower, and unfolding a banner criticizing Canada and President Bush for being climate killers. Minister, the global community is fortunate that you are still not in jail. We move to Finland and Minister Emma Kari, Minister of Climate Change and Environment. She's a member of the Green League Party in a Social Democratic-led coalition government. Her government's ambition is to be carbon neutral as early as 2035. This is a binding pledge for Finland on the road to a fossil-free welfare state. Minister, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you also for organizing this event and gathering us all here together to discuss this important subject. Sustainable development means well-being of all people within the limits of Earth's carrying capacity. So this is the reason why it's so important that all of us are here today to discuss this issue. Sustainable consumption and production patterns have a crucial role in trying to get our societies within these limits, the limits of one planet. How and what we produce and consume has a big impact on the sustainable development. The overconsumption of natural resources is one of the key challenges we need to tackle together. The use of virgin natural resources is the main cause for climate change and decrease in biodiversity. We urgently need to change our consumption and production patterns towards more sustainable and circular way. Now is the final moment to decouple human welfare and economic growth from the use of virgin natural resources. The European Green Deal under development and implementation in the European Union is an important and concrete step towards accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. An important part of it is a circular economy action plan containing comprehensive initiatives for more sustainable and circular production and consumption. We aim to significantly reduce the overall life cycle climate and environmental footprint of the products placed on the EU market. Sustainability and circularity will be the new norm for products. There will be requirements for longer product lifetimes, durability, repairability, and increasing the circular material use rate, reducing waste and achieving higher recycling rates. Sustainable society is not just about individual technologies and technological innovations, but we have to move to social innovations and systemic change of societies. Systemic change is often disruptive. We have to change and phase out certain activities. However, it does not have to mean that economy collapses, but the economy transforms. We have to stop, knock and block the old system and build back better. Targets are important. Finland has, for example, decided to phase out coal as a source of energy by 2029 and become climate neutral by 2035. We have also set a cap to curb the overconsumption of natural resources. We have set a target to double the productivity of resources, as well as to double the circular material use by 2035. The targets will guide the mobilization of a whole range of policy instruments, regulatory instruments, economic incentives, but also soft law, voluntary agreements, and a lot of information. One piece of good news is that markets are already reorienting themselves. Sustainable finance instruments that target positive impact on the environment are worth more than $35 trillion globally. To help investors, companies, and citizens navigate in this growing market, the EU has established a classification for green investments. We call it Sustainable Finance Taxonomy. The aim is to define and classify activities that make a significant contribution to addressing environmental challenges. I see a big change also in corporate governance. Companies are not just reporting about their corporate social responsibility, but are more and more changing their business models to address environmental challenges. Companies are counting the environmental footprint as well as the positive handprint of their business. But ministers, colleagues, we need to do more to accelerate this development. Environmental taxation is a way to put a price on pollution and the use of natural resources. We need to give a price signal to markets towards more responsible consumption and production patterns. However, as you know, in a global market economy, this is not an easy task at a national level. For this reason, we need to make cooperation and together develop and implement economic instruments such as carbon pricing. The public sector can also act as an important trendsetter in introducing to the market more sustainable products and services with less harmful environmental impacts. One way to direct markets is public procurement. In Finland, the value of public procurement is around 16% of our GDP, making it one of the largest by value in the Nordic EU countries. Innovative and sustainable procurement is a central goal in procurement in Finland. UK's Climate Change Committee has estimated that over 60% of the required climate actions also require a change in behavior, so consumers' role is critical. Formal education and awareness raising are both powerful ways to motivate people and promote changes towards more sustainable and circular consumption patterns. Feeling of being a part of the solution is important for us all. Involving citizens through co-creation has been successful in Finland in finding solutions to everyday problems in ways that benefit also our common planet. Local authorities and NGOs have found ways to use soft interventions or nudging to help people make more sustainable choices, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in transport or heating, for example. Last but not least, as John Kerry also raised, one cannot overemphasize the role of research and scientific institutions in producing sustainability data, as well as more sustainable and circular technologies and innovations. And in addition to technological innovations, we need social innovations new ways of thinking and cooperating, sharing, and taking care of each other, including nature. Thank you, TERI, for your important work for protecting our common planet.
Thank you, Madam Minister. That was not just very substantive, but it was very thoughtful too. And let me say this purely from my perspective as a citizen of India and a citizen of this earth, that thoughtfulness, sensitivity, the need for inclusion, the need for taking everyone together, and of course, innovation are going to be particularly important. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. That was excellent. Really, you've given us a great platform to try and think through things, also in a manner that involves and takes everyone together. You mentioned pricing. I must leave a thought with you, contrarian as it may be, that usually pricing has very little impact on the most profligate of consumers. And it tends to disproportionately impact those who are trying to climb up the ladder. It's a contra view in terms of the way economics, as we have been taught, tends to actually work out in behavioral science and actually in the world in which we are. But anyway, it's a thought. Madam Minister, I am delighted to see the blue flag with two of you, Minister Lemke and with you. And I want to tell you that TERI has, of course, an old relationship with the European Union. In fact, Vice President Timmermans will also be addressing the World Sustainable Development Summit. But I, on behalf of TERI, am also involved in a track to purely off the official table, dialogue with European partners on what can we do in terms of leveraging each other's abilities and needs for the greater good of humankind. And some of the things that we have identified only in the area of money and finance is obviously money and finance itself, but capacity building and the fact that you just mentioned, which is very important and perhaps not yet noticed much in India, which is taxonomy. And I think the fact that you've taken decisions on that, people may have various views on whether this should have been included or not. I personally am very much in favor of what was included. But the fact that you started working on this could be a signal to many and to unleash the possibilities in terms of the huge amounts of savings in the developed world becoming available for investment in the developing world, which is really one of the major imperatives of the times that we are in. Thank you very much, Madam Minister, and of course to your colleague from the European Union, the German Minister too. These actions on the part of the European Union, I think, are particularly important. Madam Ministers, we are now going to have the privilege of having Her Excellency Barbara Pompili, the Honorable Minister of Ecological Transition of France, address us. You know, India and France have very old and very deep relationships, and several of the facets are known to everyone. But let me tell you the one facet which is particularly important to us today and which began at Paris. This was the launch of the International Solar Alliance, which India and France even today co-chair and are anchoring in various ways. This is a partnership, we believe, which is a wonderful role model for a developing and a developed country to come together in the service of humanity. And I really think there are ideas which are coming out of the International Solar Alliance and its entire set of other areas in which they are looking at in terms of developing, which could have a huge and game-changing impact in terms of what we are all engaged in, greater sustainability and lowering our carbon footprints. Madam Minister Pompili, the screen is yours.
Dear Ministers, colleagues, I'm delighted to attend today the ministerial session of the World Sustainable Development Summit. The objective of a resilient planet to ensure a sustainable and just future puts a light on the challenges we collectively have to face due to the evolution of our way of lives, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. We are all one in facing their consequences, and developed countries have to show the way. Our partnership with India is key to achieve ambitious and equitable solutions. First, on the fight against climate change. Since COP26, we are closer to the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, some parties still need to submit their national determined contributions and long-term strategies to contribute to the movement toward 1.5. This is key to send a strong signal to markets that they, too, need to align their practices with our common objective. Mobilizing finance is a key requirement to enable developing countries to implement their ambition. At COP26, developed countries showed that they would meet the target of mobilizing $100 billion per year in developing countries in 2023 and then exceed it. Moreover, an alignment of public and private investments with the objectives of the Paris Agreement is needed to ensure a sustainable future. The rules of the Paris Agreement are now finalized, and it will allow the implementation of an international carbon market. In France, we are acting on finance first. Over the past few years, we have implemented and regularly strengthened reporting obligations on the climate impact of financial investors. This system requires investors to report annually on the strategy for aligning with the Paris Agreement and to set 5-year greenhouse gas emission targets up to 2050. With regard specifically to the transparency of financial information, all of the large French companies now recognize the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures as a benchmark and are working to deepen their implementation. Then, on transparency of climate action, France will act to strengthen the international framework for accountability of climate commitments. The consolidation of the International Climate Action Programme, IPAC, launched within the OECD, will contribute to this. And on solidarity, France, alongside Germany, the US, the UK, and the European Commission, launched a Just Energy Transition Partnership with South Africa in 2021. We are ready to reiterate such a collaboration with other partners to accelerate environmental transition. France pledged to provide €6 billion in climate finance per year from 2021 to 2025, 1/3 of which will go to adaptation. And with the EU, we are the biggest contributor of public climate finance with €21.9 billion provided in 2019. As said before, all actors are needed in this fight against climate change. That is why the French One Planet Data Hub initiative, to be launched in March 2022, will aim to improve the visibility of non-state actors' commitments. Second, a resilient and equitable future also depends on the protection of biodiversity and of the global ocean. France and India are championing the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, which objective is to adopt a strong and ambitious target to protect at least 30% of lands and 30% of seas globally by 2030. We need to strengthen our efforts to mobilize new members and show a united front at the upcoming CBD and CCD COP15. The fight against deforestation also needs to be a top priority. The French presidency of the Council of the European Union is to conclude the negotiations on a regulation on deforestation-free products at the EU level. There is an urgent need for policy coherence related to deforestation-free supply chains for agricultural commodities. This will help transform our economies worldwide towards greener production, trade, and consumption. India and France are working very closely for the conclusion of the UN BBNJ legally binding treaty for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. This universal treaty will be the international legal framework to protect our global ocean. France, the European Union, and all member states are working hand in hand with the most ambitious countries, such as India, who was among the first joining the High Ambition Coalition on BBNJ. This coalition was launched during the One Ocean Summit, aiming to conclude the ambitious BBNJ Treaty on Ocean Protection as soon as possible in 2022. It is time to act for the ocean and to send our strong political support to negotiators. Last, a sustainable future also means the transition to a circular economy, which will reduce pressure on natural resources and will create sustainable growth. This is the aim of the EU's Circular Economy Action Plan. Circular economy has been one of the building blocks of France's green policies. We have been actively promoting recycling, and from 2015 we have been implementing measures against planned obsolescence, strengthening consumer rights and designed to improve the availability of spare parts. In 2020, France enacted a new law dedicated to promoting circular economy and curbing loss and waste. As an example, since January 2021, electronic appliances must feature a repairability index. This new index has been quickly successful with measurable effects on the consumption and repairability of appliances sold in France. Once again, the partnership with India is key. At bilateral level, we would like to work on the fight against plastic pollution, including marine litter. The French Development Agency launched innovative projects in India on this topic. At multilateral level, a draft resolution has been tabled in view of UNEA 5.2 to establish an intergovernmental committee to negotiate a global agreement on plastics. The resolution France and the EU co-sponsor aims to address plastic pollution and its impacts on human health, ecosystems and landscapes. The objective is to reach the elimination or minimization of all negative impacts of plastic throughout its life cycle. India's support and mobilization during UNEA will be once again key. I wish you a fruitful summit, and I trust that our team spirit will bring us success in all our initiatives. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you. And thank you, Minister, for highlighting impressive French ambition and commitment in both pledge and in deed. I think it was particularly important the way you highlighted the need for industrial countries, developed countries, to help finance the developing countries on their road to a more sustainable future and an energy transition. You have presidential elections in 2 months' time. Best wishes. Now we cross the Pyrenees to Spain, and Minister Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. She is also a Deputy Prime Minister and member of the Socialist Party. She has, I believe, received what she says is a spectacular amount of EU funds for recovery and energy transition. Madam Minister, the floor is yours.
It is my great pleasure to join you in this very important discussion on how to move from a linear economy towards a circular economy, something that we all need. We cannot consume beyond what it is produced by the earth, by the environmental systems along a year. This is absolutely key. but moving from the way we produce and consume today towards a very different model, it is not simple, and we need everybody involved and committed to do so. When thinking about our responsibility as governments, as public institutions, we know that we are key in order to design what is the right framework to incentivize, to facilitate any citizen to take the right decision, any producer to produce in the simplest way, so to reduce the consumption of products, the consumption of raw materials, but also the consumption of those goods that could be needed in the industrial process. How to do so? We need to think in all the different phases in order to produce and put a product into the market, starting by how we define, how we facilitate the best eco-design of any product. Then, of course, we need to put in place every single policy oriented to this goal. So to think about the fiscal policy, to think about the agriculture policy, the construction policy, or the information towards the citizens, so the consumers' policies that can help in order to have smart consumers when deciding what to choose in any supermarket or in any acquisition of any good. In Spain, we have already adopted the National Strategy on Circular Economy. And together with the general assessment of what we need, what we are missing, how we are over-consuming beyond our own capacities and possibilities, we have identified some of the very key sectors in order to introduce a much more powerful policy to facilitate the transformation of each of these sectors. Starting by the tourism, how any tourist can reduce her footprint when traveling, or the construction sector, in order to facilitate the recovery of those parts of any building or infrastructure at the end of the cycle, at the end of their life cycle. But it is not only tourism or construction, it is also textile, because it is a powerful industry here in our country, or thinking about what next in all the goods we put in place in order to facilitate the first kick-off of the renewable energy policies. So what about the batteries? What about the photovoltaic panels? What about the windmills and all its goods and equipments? Something which is also very important is the agro-industry. What about the agriculture sector? What about the industry of the food industry? And this is a very common industry all over the world. There are over-packaging, customs, but there is also a need to think about the different wastes at the end of the production of the agro products, or the products that go through the agro industry to our markets, to our supermarkets, and starting to identify where we can reduce the consumption of the different pieces and how we can go towards a zero waste policy is very important. Our general assessment is that all the stakeholders are really involved and feel they can improve, and they want to improve the way they produce and the way they introduce their products into the market. We have also worked hard in a framework law so to introduce the new updates in the waste management and circular economy possibilities in our economy. This law is about to be adopted, finally adopted by the Parliament, and it introduces additional obligations in terms of reduction, in terms of separation of the different pieces of any waste, or increasing reuse and recycle obligations, as well as taxing and banning single-use plastics, or the final destination of our waste into the landfills. We want to reorientate and to insist on the right priorities to facilitate a better use of any raw material. It could be very difficult to succeed if there is not a strong commitment and willingness to develop public-private partnerships. Sometimes it is just public-public, with different levels of administration being involved, but in general terms, we need final citizens and consumers, with producers, and with the different innovators into the system to work together to facilitate the logistics, but also to facilitate the good design and the good management of any product. Finally, something very important that we have started to talk about is taxonomy. How to orientate the different decisions of any investor on where to invest, on whether it could be more useful or more wasteful if you put your money here or there. So we also need to develop some clear messages on taxonomy to investors. what it makes sense and what it doesn't make sense. It is very important that any investor or any final client, any final consumer does understand the difference of consuming well, of investing well, and the different words and values of differentiating products that do have a much more strong and a bigger footprint, and those that are properly designed, properly managed, and properly finally managed at the end of its life cycle.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That again was a substantive speech, and I personally, of course, was very happy that you brought us back to the issue of taxonomy, because it's extremely important that we try and get the rules in order so that we can all then try and focus and take our things forward. I will give the floor to Ambassador Arne Walther to say a few words at the end in summing up. But Mr. Minister from Norway and Mr. Minister from Canada, sir, some of your colleagues have had to leave, obviously some pressures, but I think it is particularly interesting that we still have the two of you, two of the most important Arctic countries. And while India has, of course, joined the Arctic framework, action or what will happen as a result of global warming, climate change in the Arctic is something that will have tremendous impacts for all of us all over the world, even though I may be in a country like India, which is relatively far away. Your Excellencies, just a few minutes to both of you, if you want to say something on Arctic, because you have already spoken on sustainable consumption and production. But I think for all of us sitting here, where glacier melts, the Himalayas are important to us, but we need to understand that for global weather, global warming, Arctic issues perhaps are of such importance that we are perhaps not even getting our head around them. Your Excellencies, let me have this privilege, and Ambassador Walther, if you agree, just for very, very brief few minutes to both of you, Your Excellencies, let me have the privilege of asking His Excellency, the Minister from Norway, to go first. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that challenge. I'm very happy you asked, because I'm very proud to say that I was quite intensely involved when we accepted India's application to become an observer to the Arctic Council. This was in 2013. I was foreign minister at the time, and we were gathered ministers only in a cabin way up in Sweden discussing this, and we did not all agree at the outset, but we did all agree at the end of the meeting, and India became an even closer partner. And as I mentioned, India has a research station, or a part of the Norwegian-run research station up in the Ålesund, and we're very thrilled to cooperate with you, because, as you say, Arctic research in our polar stations in the high north, in the Ålesund and Spitsbergen, and also on Antarctica on the Troll station, and research conducted in the Himalayas are connected, because these are excellent vantage points for following the main trends, global trends. What we see in the Arctic, but also in the Antarctica, is that global warming happens faster the closer you are to the poles, by a magnitude of several factors. It's really, really different. And it's quite interesting up in this little research station I mentioned that you can monitor background emissions, because you are so far away from any kind of human activity, so you really get the pure reading. And then you go down to that little town or little dwelling there, and then you can see that the houses that were built on permafrost have to be rebuilt, because permafrost up there in this extremely cold north is thawing. The active layer gets broader, and we can actually feel the climate change in the houses that we use to do research on climate change. You go out to the ocean, you see new species coming in because of new ocean streams and new temperatures. The ocean temperature also rises much higher in the Arctic relative to elsewhere in the globe. So what we're seeing there is what will happen in the rest of the planet. So that's why Arctic research, but also Himalaya-oriented research is so important, because it's important in itself. We see glaciers melting, whether they are in your Himalayas or our high north, but we also see the face of tomorrow if we don't act now. So to cooperate on this, and of course this knowledge, it only exists because we cooperate globally. We have to compare these findings and then see the big patterns. That's why we know we need to act. We need research. Facts have to run the place, and we need to get this ready. That's why it's so important that we have the IPCC and that we have a channel through which we filter and analyze and organize knowledge, because true politics have to be based on true knowledge.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Mr. Minister Gibo, would you like to say something on Arctic?
First, I'd like to echo what Espen just said in terms of the importance of research to inform better policies. In the case of Canada, we have an Inuit population that's composed of more than 60,000 people. Most of them live in the Arctic. And they are seeing and living the impacts of climate change every day. Espen was talking about melting permafrost, how it's affecting housing, but all of the infrastructures up in the north, including roads, airports, and it's creating great challenges. And one of the things we want to do this year, going to COP27, is to work in partnership with our Inuit colleagues to develop Canada's position when it comes to adaptation to climate change, especially in the Arctic, but also inform our position with the knowledge and traditional knowledge of Inuits to ensure that we're not telling their story, but they're telling their story to the world. Certainly in terms of what we're seeing with the impacts of climate change, but also what they're doing. To both to adapt, but also to take part as we are globally in the fight against climate change. So this is certainly one of the feature work that we will be doing in the coming year, heading into Sharm el Sheikh.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to both of you for your comments. They certainly have enlightened me. I'm going to request my co-moderator, Ambassador Arne Walther, to say his words in the substantive summing up of this session, whatever he would like to say. And then I would just say a few words of thank you to all of you. Ambassador Arne Walther, the screen is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. In fact, what more can I say after this very substantive and interesting session than thank ministers for raising our awareness of the issues at hand, laying out their government efforts with business and other stakeholders on a national basis and in global cooperation to put us on track to sustainable patterns of consumption and production. And as an Arctic national, I was very happy to hear the remarks of our two Arctic ministers at the end. The future doesn't come by itself. Well, let's say the future comes by itself, but a sustainable one does not. And political leaders and all us other stakeholders have a lot of work to do. So thank you again, ministers, and do join us tomorrow for the Sustainable Development Summit session, not least a ministerial one with ministers from developing countries. Thank you, and back to you, Ambassador Puri.
Ambassador Walther, thank you very much. Your Excellencies, the ministers from Canada and Norway who are with us, the special representative of the President of the United States, Secretary John Kerry, the minister from Germany, Minister Steffi Lemke, Minister M.A. Kari, as well as the ministers from France, as well as from Spain. I want to thank you very much on behalf of TERI. Your presence here has really added substantive meat to the discussions that will follow in the next 2 days at the World Sustainable Development Summit. Of course, I want to thank Ambassador Arne Walther for always being there to take care of so many elements of putting all of this together. But Mr. Minister, both of you, sir, I want to leave with you the thought, and this is a thought I hope will get transmitted to your other colleagues who are there. India is one of the countries which has despite its enormous development challenges, taken on the mantle of being an environmental champion. And you've seen it in the articulations and the leadership of the Prime Minister. We are a country which is wedded to nature. We are a country which believes that humankind has come all this way, but must be there for its future generations. We hope and count on your strong support. We would like to see you in India at the earliest opportunities. In this session, the word that I heard most of all was that of circularity. And there is no doubt that it is a word of critical importance in the context of sustainable consumption and production. But let me add, if you will agree, two other words. One is a word that was used, and that is adaptation. And I am glad the Honorable Minister from Canada mentioned it right now in terms of the communities which are being directly impacted in the Arctic region. And I would finally leave the big thought with all of you, that all of this is important. But at the end of the day, we all need to do something in terms of our lifestyles so that we keep this particular mantra of sustainability in consumption and production absolutely at the core of what we do. And we give, let me say, substance to the idea of circularity, because it's our lifestyles which have resulted in what is happening. And I'm sure our lifestyles in that change will result in the planet going forward and us as humans on this planet enjoying its magnificence. Thank you very much to all of you. And on behalf of TERI, I want to thank each and every one of you for finding the time. The team in TERI, led by Shelley Kedia and all her colleagues, have worked tirelessly over months to put this together. And to them, of course, my personal, huge, solid thanks. Thank you very much, Excellencies. Thank you, Ambassador Walther, and wish you all from New Delhi good night. I know that for some of you, it's the beginning of the day. So a very pleasant morning to you, sir, across the pond at the other end. Thank you very much. Thank you. We can.